Today's guest is my friend Maya Feller, a Brooklyn-based RD who graduated from New York University. Maya has always been absolutely approachable and real food-based. You'll find her on TV shows like Good Morning America, and her private practice and her team provides medical nutrition therapy, nutrition and nutrition coaching for the management of and the risk reduction of non-communicable diseases. She's the author of a new book, Eating from Our Roots, which is why she's on the show today. It was released on January 24th, and there are over 80 recipes to take you through the heritage of food, cultural foodways, and how healthy food can look different for different people. It's a pleasure to welcome Maya to the show. All right, you guys, I'm so excited about today's guest, Miss Maya Feller. We have been friends for over a year now, and I've been an Instagram fan for longer than that, and known about all of her wonderful work. And it's just, Maya, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show to celebrate your new book, Eating from Our Roots. Like, you do such a good job of infusing cultures into your eating and being inspired by just all the flavors and getting people back to their roots, which I think is really, really cool. So excited to have this conversation, excited for my community to get to know you and all the wonderful work that you do out in New York and, virtually. So thank you for being here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. And I have been an Instagram fan and follower of yours for a long time and appreciate the work that you do. And I just love how your kind of way that you think about nutrition is so straightforward and it takes like all the parts of people into consideration. I was actually just looking at one of your posts and I was like, yeah, I love that. You laid out everything that you did for the week and you're like, hands down, biggest game changer. And it's like, how do we bring nutrition to people and make it like both relevant and accessible? And I love that you think that way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, general categories work a lot better for me than strict rules, do not eat lists. Don't give me a PDF. I want to eat what I love. And I think you do the same thing. I think we're realists when it comes to just focusing on getting our hands on, when we can, the most nourishing blood sugar balancing foods and not being a perfectionist about it.
Yeah, 100%. You know what that makes me think? This morning, I was being driven to the city for a segment for the book, and I had an amazing conversation with a fellow who was driving me, and that's exactly what we're talking about. He was, kind of trying to figure out eating for type 2 diabetes and just like with the job that he has, which is like driving, and just what does that look like when he eats with intention? Yeah, we were in the car for 45 minutes, so we had a lot of time,
Yeah.
But when he eats with intention and he eats food that is like relevant to him and also supportive of his blood sugars, it was fascinating. And he was like, thank you so much. And I was like, thank you for even talking to me. I was like, this was incredible because, he was just honest and open and we were just like in each other's presence. It was pretty cool.
Well, that right there is a glimpse into who Maya is, because so many people would get in a car to drive to a segment for their own book tour and they would be worried about themselves. They'd be prepping for their segment. They would be texting friends. They would be clearing an inbox. And not everyone has gotten the chance to meet you, but I know personally how present you are when you're with people. And I know it makes a difference for the clients that you help, and I can feel it throughout your book. And it's just, I'm glad you told that story because that's who you are. And you're just like such a giver. So to give people a glimpse into your career, I think it allows people to get to know you a lot better. And it was a surprise for me, being that you're so educated and let's just say you could and have probably worked with very well-off people like the Upper East Side in New York, but you have such a big heart and you started your career in a totally different place. And I'd love for you to share like what inspired you to become an RD and who you work with and what you do.
Yeah. So Kelly, it's kind of funny when I look back and I think about my journey toward, obtaining the RD credential. My, initiation into school was actually experimental theater. And experimental theater is avant-garde. So it is very strange. It
Yeah.
is like theater of the absurd. And I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time doing that and philosophy. And then I was like, that's not possible. Well, I mean, it's possible to live, but not in New York City,
Yeah.
if those are the two things that you've studied. And so I actually eventually went back to school, and I was training for the Boston Marathon with my best friend at the time from like years and years and years. And I remember that we had like these really long runs, but she kept ending up in the hospital. Um, so like hypernatremia, hyponatremia, and basically it was because of over and under hydration. And I was like, this cannot be. Like, we love running. And I was like, you can't go to the hospital every time we run 19 miles. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to Google this. Like, even, I was like,
Yeah.
nutrition for runners. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is something to study. And it's so funny because it never crossed my mind as like an actual career. And so I thought, all right, well, I'll write an application and I'll apply to a school. And I chose NYU. Thank goodness I got in because I applied nowhere else. Um, and when I got there, I realized that actually it was very, very science heavy. And as someone who had done the majority of my undergraduate in things like performative gay theater or like, history of the avant-garde, organic chemistry was a stretch. And I I put a ton of effort in. And then once I realized that I loved the science, I said, oh, well, I mean, I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to go work in the community. And so that's how I ended up actually in community nutrition, working with a really, I'd say, marginalized and disenfranchised population, people who just, when we talk about like poverty, in New York, like I had patients who were still living with AIDS when we know that there's medication and you can live with HIV. I had patients who were living with AIDS. And there were multiple reasons, right? But it was an eye-opening like entry into what does it mean when people don't have access to these primary needs, and when health literacy and nutrition literacy and literacy levels are, not a given. So
Right.
yeah, that's where I began before, going into private practice, but I started in the community.
Well, I think it's given you, I don't even think, I know it's given you this amazing lens to look at how you work with your clients now, and also the recommendations you make to the general public online and throughout your book. It is really realistic and approachable, and from a place of access versus privilege. And it's definitely you're someone I look to for that, being that you've had such an experience. So, working in the community, what were some of the largest chronic lifestyle issues you saw, and education that was lacking in their ability to help themselves or even start to make the right choices?
That is an amazing, excellent question. I remember like kind of coming with like my proverbial textbook under my arm, like I'm going to fix this and I'm going
Yeah.
to do all the things. And like I was going to be like this dietitian, super person. Um, and like walking in, and I teach this workshop with a colleague of mine who's a nurse practitioner in health equity, Juliette Blunt. And it's looking at implicit bias in nutrition and helping people to unpack that so that we don't actually engage in harming our patients. Um, and I often give this example that I engaged in when I was first out of school. Like I went in and I had a group meal program that I was meant to oversee. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then we also had a feeding program where people could come and pick up pantry items once a week. And the first thing that I did in the group meal program was literally turn the entire menu upside down. Like I was like, no more white rice for anyone, no more fried animal proteins, no more sugar on the table, like all the like nutrition check boxes that we're taught. And like, yes, of course, we don't want to be eating fried animal proteins for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Of course, we don't want added sugars with every single meal, but that's not the way that you actually walk into anybody else's community, right? And engage or elicit a nutrition related shift. Um, and what I learned in my, I'd say, brash and not thoughtful way of interacting with my patients, like, initially, was that people didn't have access to nutrition that was safe, affordable, and energy dense and nutrient dense. And I do say energy dense, right? Because like a bag of chips will give you like 130 calories, but it's not anything. So you're not getting a good source of energy. You're not getting a good source of nutrients. Mm-hmm. And so what I learned was that because people didn't have access to this consistent food, they couldn't think about nutrition as a priority. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't have housing, mm-hmm. They didn't have healthcare, they didn't have access to education, they weren't readily or steadily employed, they didn't have access to health insurance. And so nutrition wasn't a priority because the list of I don't have was so high. And so with that question of what were these chronic lifestyle things that, were apparent to me, it was like every social determinant of health that was needed so that they could actually be healthy, they didn't have access to. And so it was like this massive trickle down. And then, of course, you see these really high rates of diabetes. You see these really high rates of high blood pressure. You see, actually, there was a lot of hepatitis C. You see these really high rates of cardiovascular disease and conditions that were not well managed. So lots of variability, meaning that, diabetic ketoacidosis was something that we would see. Right? This is something that people read in textbooks or they hear about, and they're like, that's so far from anything that I can imagine. But my population was dealing with the extremes because all of those needs weren't being met. And Kelly, imagine here I come taking all of the energy density away because that's what my textbook told me to, and mm-hmm. then taking the flavor out of the meals that were actually there to sustain them because they had no access. Mm-hmm. It was such a learning experience for me because I had to unlearn what I'd been taught, and I had to slow down and actually say, oh, I want you guys to tell me, what do you need? Mm-hmm. How can I support you? And then reframe how I thought about progress. Mm-hmm. And reframe what I thought should be somebody else's endpoint.
Mm-hmm. Well, so can you share some of those learnings? Because I can only imagine how eye-opening that experience was and humbling it was. And just, it makes you the best type of practitioner because we can't help unless we listen and learn.
Yeah, totally. I remember that all of the patients that were part of the program really wanted fresh produce, mm-hmm. right? They really wanted things like farm trips. You're like, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with everything, right? Because, you talk about it, right? We know all these kind of lifestyle behaviors that we can engage in really can help to reduce stress. Mm-hmm. If you're living in a stressful situation, and a trip to a farm is something that could be at your disposal. Well, there's nothing better than playing with animals and looking at fresh produce and being out in nature and green, because it does just give you that like kind of breath. And so they really said to me, they were like, listen, we love all the nutrition education that you give us. They're like, but what we really love is the pantry bags that have culturally relevant foods. So like all the big leafy greens, fresh garlic, fresh onion, and they're like, and we love the trips. We love to go to the farm. And so I was able to organize a couple of those trips, in my time there, and also to change some of the makeup of those pantry bags with donations from local CSAs and the Park Slope Food Co-op, just to make it so that it was robust, a really nice mixture of, rice and canned goods and boxed goods, but also some of that fresh produce, because many of my patients were from either the English-speaking Caribbean or Creole-speaking, also Latin America, and they were really accustomed to having access to like very well-flavored food with a plethora of fresh herbs and spices. And so they were like, this is what we want. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna help. I can, be part of like getting that into these bags. And that was interesting because I may not have learned that had I not listened.
Right. And when you just think about the impact it makes, just simply the impact it makes when someone decides to cook at home versus eat out, eat from a package or a box. Like, yes, I understand that a lot of charitable donations that are made to, food banks really are from large ag businesses and they are box goods or canned goods, but being able to infuse their flavors and be inspired to cook and to make foods at home, you're making a massive impact on their nutrient density right there. You're getting them inspired to be in their kitchen, to make to make extras, to have leftovers, to eat their own food, and then it's such a like source of joy for them, right? Because if they're worried about the roof over their head, their healthcare, staying employed, a lot of people rely on their family, their community, and their culture to bring them joy and happiness. And taking that away by trying to fix their blood sugar isn't always the answer.
It's never the answer. I mean, I was just like so wrong in so many ways. You know what I mean? And I had to learn to say it also. And I had to apologize to them, Kelly. I had to say, like, hey guys, listen, like I was a jerk when I arrived. Like
Yeah.
straight up, like that's not cool what I did. And of course you didn't want to listen to me. And of course you were like, it doesn't matter what you're saying, because like I was like a joy sucker. Like I took the joy out. And, quickly, of course, I mean, it was like 30 days. Like I did like a full, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And, and then really got on a totally different path. And by the end of my tenure there, I was like sitting in my office with my patients and we were closing the door. There was definitely nutrition happening, but I was like, show me those pictures. Like, what you do last weekend, like really building that rapport so that then I could say, like, okay, so yeah, you're planning to go out with your friends this weekend. Like, what are you going to do around food? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Right. Because there was this space that they knew that I could help troubleshoot. Right. And I could think about it in a realistic way. Oh, okay, you're going to go to the bodega to get food from the bodega. Cool. What do they have in the trays that are there? The steam tables. Okay, like how could we switch this up? Or can we make this into 6 meals? Or even Kelly, you wouldn't believe this. It was like, all right, when you get it home, let's put it into a separate container, not the container that it came in, that's like a sealed lid, and put it in your fridge. Like things that some people may take for granted, like lifestyle things. We're not going to put pots in your refrigerator. We're going to move it into Tupperware. So it was just like by me listening and not being judgmental, then I could actually see the whole picture of really what it meant to live this like kind of disenfranchised and marginalized life. But like me saying like, okay, I recognize that and I'm going to work within where you are.
Yeah. Well, you've done a phenomenal job doing that throughout your career since you're first learning. How to meet people where they are. And it's given you invaluable skills. I mean, truly. And you see it come through your work all the way through to today and even in the book. And I'm so excited to see a cookbook that really takes that into account. It really is a new look, and getting people excited and inspired about their culture and finding those flavors again. And because it doesn't really matter what gets people excited about cooking in their house, it's that they are, and that they are empowered to do that, to take care of themselves and their family. So can we talk about the road to launching and publishing your first book, Eating from Our Roots, which is a Goop Press book? I have to just share. That's a big deal. A huge nod with an amazing marketing powerhouse behind you because of what you stand for. So let's talk about it. What inspired you to write the book? What and what is it all about?
Yeah, so I have to fully agree with you. Major, major nod to be, one of the authors on Goop Press. And the support has been like incredible. I mean, GP standing behind and saying like, listen, I love this book. I'm speechless.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. When I had the first meeting with Goop in Random House, and they said, we want some ideas. Like, what do you want to write? Um, so typical Maya. I was like, I'm going to travel around the world and I'm going to go into every grandmother's kitchen and talk to them. And then, the shutdown happened. But,
Yeah.
but I always knew, and I think partly because of how I grew up, and also partly because of this life that I live, that it was going to be important for me to look at the intersection of culture, history, race, and ethnicity from a lens of food. And I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And they were like, okay, wait, take us with you. Like, what are you saying? And I'm like, we're gonna have like recipes from all around the world. And we're gonna talk about food, and we're gonna talk about culture, history, race, socioeconomics. And they were like, wait a second, okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Um, and and that's kind of how the idea came to me. Um, and so there was definitely some concern, right? Because whenever you write recipes from a culture that's not your own, the question is, are you stepping into an area that is respectful, right? And are you talking about this from a lens of, oh, this is great, versus, which we've seen happen in the US, I'm going to make this better, right? And in the book, I was very clear, I'm not making anything better, right? Because it's inherently good.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be made better, right?
Yeah.
And that was my conversation around food, is that it's really up to us. And I think I challenge everyone to expand their palate within their personal likes, dislikes, their finances, their health, any allergies, but expand the palate to include a multitude of flavors, because you may not only learn about another culture, but you may surprise yourself and realize that, wow, I can have more than what's been told to me as like the pinnacle of quote unquote health.
Yeah. I feel like the most exciting thing to me is traveling to different places to learn about the culture and try the food. And when I think about why I want to even do takeout, it's mostly because I'm getting bored of my own food and I'm
Yes.
looking for more flavor. And I feel, I mean, sometimes it's, it was a couple years ago I learned how to make a curry, and I am not, I am not as good as it as some of the takeout I can get, right? But to even expand my palate and expand my knowledge and just, I don't want to call it expertise, but my novice expert,
Yeah.
my novice ability to bring those flavors into my home, expose my kids to all those flavors. Like, I love doing that. I get so excited by that. And I think it really does, again, go back to keeping us feeling inspired in the kitchen to cook for our families, to try new things, to have different types of conversations. So with all of the recipes that you shared in your book, what expanded your family's palate the most, and what was adventurous for you? What became a family favorite, or something that you're like, wow, now I always include saffron in everything, or whatever it is? Like, what got you excited?
So it's really funny. And this links back to my initial, textbook under my arm story. Dietitians, we're trained, right? No sugar, no fat, no salt, because we're like, we know all the research. So I'm like, it's going to get you. It's going to get you. Like it's in us.
Mhm.
And I was like, I've got to bring chefs in, because like, listen, I can cook. I love food and I love flavor, but it will be very low sodium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it will be very, very low sodium. There will be like, no added sugar. I mean, Like the sugar will come from a piece of fruit. And there will be no fat. Like the only fat will be like a mono or poly unsaturated fat. And that I was clear. I was like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
Right. Like I want a book where people can recognize tastes of home and there may be slight modifications. Maybe there's a little bit more plants, or maybe we've modified the grain and we're using an ancient grain, but that it is reminiscent enough that they're like, I want to go back to this again. And that it doesn't feel like deprivation and it doesn't feel like the joy's been sucked out. And so the biggest learning for me, Chef Sylvia Barbon was the main chef who was in my kitchen. Kelly, I only have, okay, so I shouldn't say only because that's, so let me go back and say this. As someone who works in food, my kitchen's an important space. And so when we were thinking about putting the kitchen together, and my kitchen's 100% reclaimed, I have to say, because that's like very in line with me. So I was like, I'm not buying a new kitchen. I was like, they're throwing them in the trash. We're going to get like, a reclaimed kitchen because that's what's better for kind of my ethos. So I have 5 burners, which is excellent for a home cook. Yeah. But 5 burners for testing over 80 recipes. Really, we did 110. Tough. Yeah. It's tough. Yeah. I have one sink. Yeah. I do have 2 ovens. Also tough, right? Yeah. For the business that I'm in.
You're in there for a month and a half.
We're 2 months. For a month and a half. My entire kitchen was like covered with spices, and every day there were deliveries coming because it was still the shutdown portion of the pandemic. So it was Chef Sylvia Barbon and her girlfriend would come sometimes, and she was our assistant, meaning like we potted up. And so she would be like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z. She'd mask up and like run out to the store if it didn't arrive. Because remember when you would put a delivery order in and like they'd say 15 items are missing.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a really tough time to recipe test.
It was. So, I said to Sylvia, help me, like teach me how to be artful and intentional with these additives. Right? Because I want them in there. And we got creative. We used maple sugar. We used date syrup. There's pomegranate syrup. You know what I mean? There is, in some of them, there's actual, table sugar, but we played with all of the different things that we could put in, and they're intentionally placed. Right? And then there's notes also. So like if you make this and you find that it's too sweet for you, reduce some of those added sugars, right? Or, we played with the salt and we were really mindful. There were times where Sylvia was like, more salt. And I was like, nope. I was like, we're going to have to find something else. And it was like lemon, vinegar, lime, more heat.
Yeah.
But, so that for me was really great to be exposed in that way. And, being married to someone from Switzerland who grew up with their mother making them fresh bread every morning, and there was butter and cheese. They're thrilled. My husband's thrilled. He's like, thank goodness. And my kids are like, hallelujah. So now when I cook, there's a lot more intentional use of additives, not just herbs and spices, because I was always heavy on the herbs and spices. I was like the queen of that. But some of those things that really just like give the flavor a little bump up, and you hardly need any.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, the same like you, just really focused on blood sugar balance, really worried about any added sugar in anything. And I think the most freeing thing for me, which I realize also is a privilege, is working with Levels, which is a CGM company. And one thing that I really started to test was, what did it look like with my blood sugar if I put like a half to a teaspoon of honey or maple syrup in my vinaigrette, homemade dressing with apple cider vinegar and olive oil, and just the body and flavor, like just the balanced flavor that creates. And then seeing that it in a whole meal with mixed macronutrients, with fresh produce, with a protein, did little to nothing to my blood sugar, gave me so much more flexibility and less rigidity in black and white around well, what's important here? And for
Right.
me, that was the freedom that I needed to say, oh, like if this is what's going to get me to eat all of those like dark leafy greens that are slightly bitter and a kale salad and get my kids eating it, or at least willing to try it, like this kind of freedom and flexibility does keep you excited in the kitchen, and it does give you, a more broad palette and less rules, which is it's pretty freeing when you're trying to stay motivated to be in your own kitchen all the time. So I wouldn't say
And
that I'm adding it all the time, but I'm like now I'm like, oh, I'll just put a little squeeze of that mandarin that was left on the counter into my dressing, or a little bit of honey or maple, like I said, and I don't think twice about it now. I needed the science to show me that it was not that big of a deal for me first. But it really is keeping things interesting.
I love that. And I mean, I also think like imagine someone who is actually trying to make a modification based on a diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
And we know that there's a particular way that people eat in this country, and it's like either all or nothing. There's either you're
Mhm.
like in the full restrict, like we don't do the middle, we don't live in the gray.
Yeah.
And if we did live in the gray, there'd be a lot less chronic illness.
Mhm.
Um, and if we think about also what's accessible in, especially lower income communities, it's an abundance of things that really do promote systemic inflammation. And when that's really what there is the majority of the time, it's so
Mhm.
much harder, right? Because
Mhm.
access is limited.
Right.
And so when I think like, oh, a patient of mine is sitting down to a glass of orange juice with breakfast, um, I'm like, that's excellent. They're sitting down to a glass of orange juice as they're having breakfast. Because in my head, I'm just trying to say, like, how can I back that up with a meal? Right. Because
Right.
just like you said with the science, I know there's going to be a different blood sugar response.
Right.
And probably, in my early days of being a dietitian, I would have taken the juice away completely.
Right.
Like, no, you can't have it. But now I say, okay, well, let's talk about how much you're having. Let's talk
Mhm.
about, is it really 100% juice? Let's
Mhm.
talk about what are you having it with? And then let's
Mhm.
talk about how often it's showing up in your pattern of eating and how do you
Mm.
feel when you're having it? And
Ugh.
so the questions are totally different, right? And then it allows for like these sustainable shifts and
Right.
modifications that still honor the individual's flavor profile, likes, dislikes, and what's accessible to them.
I love it. Moving away from all or nothing, really, it creates that consistency that ultimately prevents chronic lifestyle diseases, that allows for more flexibility, that gets people, yeah, really taking care of themselves in a sustainable way for the long run. Like, take something away from me, and that's the one thing I want. And happens
Totally,
with most people.
totally.
I know in the cookbook, you include modifications for health conditions. What was your, inspiration in doing that? Obviously, your career, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So a lot of the patients that I work with come to me for, a non-communicable condition. And I know that, especially because of my initial community work, that there are neighborhoods where, I can say, oh, I want you to sit down and have this type of balanced macronutrient plate in this way. And like, that's not a possibility. It's not a
Mhm.
possibility. And so I wanted to add those modifications in so that people could use the recipes as kind of a backbone or a roadmap and then expand upon it for themselves. So there's certain notes about like certain pieces of produce, right? Like this type of potato may elicit a higher blood sugar spike in comparison to this type of potato. So instead of saying don't have potatoes, it's like make your choice based on where you are with your health. And so I wanted to give people some initial steps that they could generalize and then personalize so that it works for them.
You're also on a mission to make food accessible to everyone, and that being a piece of the book as well. Can you talk about your mission for food access and just meeting people where they are?
Yeah, that's a really big one. I was just at a conference recently And it was so interesting because we often talk about like canned goods and we talk about things like canned beans, which is like highly controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are like pro canned beans and some people are completely against them. But I say like, listen, if I'm trying to get my patient to have more beans, then we're talking about like, okay, what can we do with this can of beans and how can we actually manipulate the can? Um, and when I say manipulate the can, I mean things like rinsing the beans before consuming them. Cuts
Yeah.
down 40% of the additives, as you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this conference, there was a discussion around jarred fruit
Mm-hmm.
and a similar discussion. What do you do when all your patient has access to is a jar of like peaches, but it's in juice?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably years ago, I would have said like, don't eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, why couldn't your patient just rinse it the same way that we have them rinse canned beans?
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, would you believe I was in session with a patient the other day? And I mean, I know this stuff, right? But it was top of mind from coming from the conference. And I said to them, oh, yeah, you can just like rinse your peaches from your jar. And they're like, I can rinse my peaches from my jar. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And it'll take, a significant portion of whatever the additive is that's in there. And then that gives you access to the peach as a part of your breakfast. And they said, this is so exciting because I can never afford peaches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that seems like inconsequential. But when we're trying to get people to actually eat more fruits and vegetables and the messaging scares them away from eating more fruits and vegetables, we have to get creative in like helping to have those things show up on their plates.
Right.
So when I work with people, I'm really, really careful in how I talk about food and like the vehicle, that it arrives in. And I try my best to remove shame from the conversation because there is this idea that, there's a moral hierarchy around food.
Mm-hmm.
And if you eat peaches from a jar, you're somehow not as good as someone who gets a peach from a farmer's market.
Mm-hmm.
And it's simply not true.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm thinking about access, I'm really careful with my language because, like I said, my entire mission is to help people actually increase the nutrient density of their pattern of eating.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to look different for everyone. And let me tell you, Kelly, it took me a while to get comfortable having that conversation because I'd be like, yeah, but I know for a fact that you shouldn't do it this way, you shouldn't do it that way. But I mean, if we are working with access, if we're working with limited food dollars, if we're working with limited time, and that's the majority of this country, we have
Yeah.
to have different conversations.
Definitely. I feel like social media can be like a great place to learn. It can also be a great way to be very, very confused and overwhelmed by all the problems that are happening in our food supply. You might take beans, for example, and be like, BPA, BPS, all these endocrine disrupting chemicals in the liner. And then, look at organic food versus non-organic food, pesticides. And bottom line is like, whatever it is that you're scared about, it's not actually taking away the nutrition that's present in that food. And we just have to get in the habit of bringing these things into our home. And I know for me personally, like this morning I had tuna fish out of a can for breakfast, which my husband calls cat food. But
You and my daughter, I'm going to send her to you. You guys can have canned tuna side by side.
Yeah. And like knowledge is empowering. It's also disempowering. And I feel like there have been times when I'm pregnant. I'm going to my third trimester. I'm like, oh, there's so many things I can be like, should I be worried about the mercury level? Should I be worried about the endocrine disrupting chemical? Should I worry about the can? Should I worry about the sodium? Should I worry about, like, list all the things that you may be worried about? And I'm like, no, I'm starting my day with protein. I made this as a quick protein to put in our fridge. I loaded it with pickles. I'm pregnant, so I'm eating that for breakfast now in carpool drop off. It's fine. But I mean, the reality is like, if we can sit there and help people find the good in the food that they're eating, and that's why I like general categories, because I'm like, I started my day with protein.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was some jarred, fermented, or pickled pickles in there. There's a veggie and some fiber. Like, okay, like, you've got to find the wins. You've got to find the silver lining. You've got to find the motivation to keep going. And I think that's what you do so well. And it's really admirable and approachable, which is the key for today's day and age and getting people consistent and making
Yeah.
real change.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Right. That's the message. It's like consistency in today's day and age, because like yesterday's yesterday is not working for today. Like, man, society's so fast. We're like on a whole other trajectory.
Yeah, real fast.
It's real fast. It's real fast. And nutrition is the same thing, right? I mean, we went from people saying like, I love a 30-minute meal to what can I make in 5 minutes or less?
Yeah, well, we're just instinct. We're goldfish now. We have a 2-minute attention span. I'm sure half the people are like listening to this on 2 speed, like, okay, well, what's the message here? It's okay. It's okay. We're just talking fast.
Right. So true. So true.
So which is funny too, because when we look at your cookbook, Eating from Our Roots, like, you're talking about traditional cultural meals that are cooked slowly, that are about having a moment and community around the table, taking time in your kitchen.
Like the gravlax recipe takes like a full day.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of your favorite recipes, and then we'll, with the last few minutes of our episode, we'll dive into what you recommend to your clients, your daily 5, kind of how you and your family are eating. You're a working mom with kids, a hubby, the whole thing. I want to know how you do it too. So talk to me about some of your favorite recipes, and then we'll dive into your recommendations in your life.
Okay. I mean, so I love all the recipes. I'm super partial to seafood just because it's one of my favorite things. So all of the seafood recipes, and they're from different parts of the world, are my favorites. I think that that's what I'll say. But then, I mean, I think of other things that are not seafood based in the book, and I'm like, oh, I love that as well. Yeah, I do think the seafood ones, like, I definitely gravitate toward. So I'll say to people, you'll have to look because they're literally splattered around the world. But it's like all of this like wonderful, like just taste of seafood.
Okay. Well, I'll have to check those out. And then what about you and your family? Are you making a lot of seafoods? What do like the daily eating patterns in your family look like? And are you using what you recommend to your clients, your daily 5 at home? And what's the daily 5?
So our eating patterns are, it's interesting. We have a lot of family meals. Uh, so my daughter has breakfast. I usually stand with her. She's having breakfast every single morning, and it could be anything from muesli that I've made to oats that I've doctored with like chia flax, like nut seeds in there. My yogurt from the farmer's market. I have like such a heavy duty like yogurt addiction that I buy like 15 containers at a time, and it's like every 3 weeks.
Okay, I like it.
I mean, we're heavy on the yogurt. Running Brook Farms, man, they love me. I love them. And that's kind of like what the morning looks like. And it's like really varied. Usually there's always a couple dozen farm eggs in my refrigerator. And for anyone that follows me, they know that like I've been known to be like, God, look at this egg. It's gorgeous.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I love a farmer's market. And that's kind of like the morning. Everyone's out at lunch. My husband and I, when we're both working from home, we do eat together. We'll sit.
Cute.
It's super cute.
That's really
We'll have
cute.
lunch. And lunch is usually leftovers. I cook most nights of the week. I love plants. I do encourage everybody to eat plants as they tolerate. I have some patients who've got some like GI stuff, so they can't really hang with the cruciferous vegetables, and they got to cook them very well, the other plants. But I am a plant pusher.
Okay.
So there's like a lot of plants. Usually the bottom part of my fridge, Kelly, is just packed with greenery. And I cook whatever's in season, literally.
Okay.
So If it's in season, I'm cooking it. And if it's not in season, truthfully, I've purchased it frozen.
Yeah.
So that I can make it kind of year round. And some of the things that like I do talk to my patients about, like varying the types of oils that they use. Like we have a huge variety of oils, from cooking oils to finishing oils, herbs and spices. That's 100%. I'm like phyto-phi everything.
Yeah.
Um, and I do, like, in the summer when I have better access, I also have a planter that I put like a ton of, fresh herbs in. And I season everything from my salads to my greens to my vegetables that I eat raw. Like if my daughter even has like a snack of like peppers, carrots, and cucumbers, I squeeze lime and like tahini on it. Like
Um,
we season everything. And I do
yeah.
talk to people about that. Like you said, when you add certain flavors, then your kids are like, oh, this is delicious. I want to try it.
Yeah. They're definitely open to it. So what is the daily five?
Okay, so the daily five for sure for me is plenty of water. um, Lots of like nutrient density. So I'm thinking fruits, vegetables. Um, Interestingly enough, I'm not like a heavy duty like starch person. Don't ask why. I do love a protein.
Me too.
um, right. And then the other thing is sleep.
Yeah.
Like really like sleep. And so I'd have to say it's water, fruits, vegetables, a delicious, well-seasoned protein, and a good amount of sleep.
I mean, that right there is taking care of 85 to 90% of your health.
Yeah.
Truly, like hydrated, full of fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, and then sleeping to rejuvenate and truly cleanse your lymphatic system, your brain, everything, detoxify, digest, keep blood sugar down. That's good stuff. That's
Yeah.
that's really good stuff. And again, so on point for being realistic and approachable and not asking people to have a 50-point wellness plan daily.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, like when I think about kind of what wellness looks like in my family and in my life, there's a lot of like nutrition, but then there's also like, what's the other part, the restore? Like, how often are we outside? Like, how often are we getting into nature? When was the last time like I was able to stand barefoot somewhere? And those are the like free things that even I talk to my patients about. Oh, you live in the city? Okay, where's there a city park that has a patch of clean grass that you can stand on? Go
Mhm.
there, stand there in the sun. Don't worry
Yeah.
about what anyone's thinking when they're looking at you. Just take your shoes off, stand in the sun, do a couple deep breaths, and then keep it moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's stuff like that where it's accessible, it's free, it's outside, it's nature, it's vitamin D, it's stress reducing. I mean, I know you run and that with a pair of tennis shoes, nowadays I've got the Nike and Adidas outlet down the street from me right now, getting shoes for $20. So
Wow, no way.
pretty awesome. Get yourself an outlet.
That's incredible. So wait, Kelly, what are your daily five?
For me, I do focus on blood sugar balance. So it's those sort of same things like the protein, fat, fiber, deep leafy greens. But what's come into play for me this year has been meditation. It was something I was really resistant against. I was a competitive soccer player and loved a hot vinyasa yoga class with pumping music and kind of like the breath work type practices were super active. And then I spent a good 18 months being really sleep deprived with my second son, Toshin. I had some mom guilt going back to work a little bit early. He had some middle of the night wakings, and the easy button was breastfeeding and holding him and wanting to be with him and having this kind of level or layer of guilt that was like, I'm his mama bear, but I'm also the breadwinner who's like out working all day. And I feel like I'm already splitting my time between the two boys and he's not getting enough of me. And so I really did our family a little bit of a disservice by not having boundaries around his sleep and supporting him to get into like a really good sleep routine, which really wrecked sleep for not
Mm-hmm.
for Sebastian as much. He's an early riser, but for Chris and I, which is really detrimental to our like resilience, our mental health, our
Yeah.
energy, our ability to follow through with our goals. And it's funny, it kind of reminds me of your first job out of school where you're like, wow, I'm learning a lot about the recommendations that I've made to people. And I felt like I learned so much in those 18 months about how I was speaking to the mothers and fathers of my community and the
Mm-hmm.
expectations I had for them in regards to what wellness looked like, what taking care of your family looked like when you are not sleeping. Like, think about people who work multiple
Yep.
jobs, work overnight, night shifts, really who aren't, don't have the ability to prioritize sleep. And then the people who are having a hard time sleeping, like me, because of young children or family illnesses or whatever the case may be, like it rocks you. And so I just
Mm-hmm.
went like, well, the recommendations that I'm making and the things that I'm doing, like rock bottom, aren't working for me. And so
Yeah.
what do I need to do to get clear and to get back to what those things were that I took for granted? I definitely took for granted having a sort of very resilient, optimistic mindset about like what was capable in my life and what manifesting and all of that stuff. Like that came pretty naturally for me. And then I went 18 months without sleep. And I mean, really broken up 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6 was a good night of sleep, and went like, whoa, my head's in the wrong place. We come off 2 pretty hard years,
Yeah.
like of
Yeah.
stress, culturally, emotionally, race stress, pandemic. Like we were we were on the roller coaster. And
Yeah, we were.
I was like, how do I get back to that place of feeling clear and feeling grateful and coming from like a full heart, and being able to impact people the way I want to. And it started with me just taking like I it's called the 6 phase meditation, and it's a guided meditation. So it's not silent. It is like someone telling you there are 6 things that we go through, whether it's forgiveness, it's compassion, it's, what you're grateful for in your family life, your work life, your personal life. You go through, thinking about your day, like hour by hour in a few minutes, and then manifesting like 3 years out. What would you like it to look like, and have visions of like cooking for my family and having the youngest be 3 years old. I'm pregnant with him right now. So it's like those kind of things. But a long story short, it has now become like a lifeline for me and something that
Mm-hmm.
Chris knows, Bash knows, Tasha knows, like mommy needs 18 minutes. Like if I don't work out today, if I don't, get certain things done that I wanted to get done, work out XYZ, like if I do this, I am stable for everybody and in the place I want to be for myself and for our family and for the community that I show up for. So it's been an 18-minute major shift in my life to get me back to where I wanted to be. And it was just doing that at the end of last year that I went like, I need to ask for help. And we got help with like a
Mm-hmm.
sleep consultant. And I was lucky to be able to do that. And now my children sleep 7 to 6:30 a.m. And I've had 4.5, 5 solid months of like actual sleep. And I feel like, what is happening? My brain is on fire. I'm like back to being like so pumped about it, but it's just like it starts to just grate on you.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but it's definitely like a tumultuous time post pandemic, post kind of everything that we were all dealing with, that I went like, whoa, hold the phone. I
Yeah.
need a
Yeah.
pause break. It like became air and water for me. Like, okay, this is my new thing.
Yep.
I always said it wasn't. And I think that's like growth mindset, like just have to be in a place of saying like, wait a second, let's reevaluate based on our life and where we're at
Yep.
right now.
Yep. I hear you. Like I hear you like so loud and clear and like in such a very real way. Not being rested is like it's torturous. And we
Yeah.
just can't, like there's no one that can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's incredible that you have found that practice. and that you are able to carve out that space in your family and that there's so much love that you guys, I mean, that everyone's like, oh, yeah, this is what mommy's doing so that she can be present for herself and us. But like, that's gorgeous,
Thanks.
you know?
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like when I know it's a crazy day, 18 minutes prior to like when my kids' lights turn on in their room that tell them they're allowed to be awake, like doesn't actually feel the same as our wake up times, which, post time change here in California, we're 3:45 to 4:15 a.m., like unsustainable wake ups,
That's
Yeah.
unreasonable. That is
Yeah.
unreasonable. That's unreasonable.
So before we wrap up today, I kind of want to talk about about your moving meditation, your love of running. I know, you talk about food and your relationship with food, having a healthy lifestyle as a marathon. Can we talk a little bit about how it's inspired you, keeps you going, grounds you, and how you relate it back to food?
Yeah. I mean, I do love to run and I've been running for years. And it's interesting. I've gone through periods where I couldn't run because this is like, you're not going to believe this, but stretching is the one thing that I have to get significantly better at doing. And
Mhm.
for anyone that's a runner out there, you know that you must stretch if you want to have a long running career.
Mhm.
Um, and so I have prioritized movement for years, though, for years, because it makes me feel better from an emotional perspective. And as I said, the outside, like I love the outdoors. This summer, Kelly, we were gone for an entire month. Um,
Yes.
like an entire month. And people were like, really? I was like, oh yeah. I have never left for a month. And we went away and we were in nature for so many days. And then we did this epic hike, the entire family. And I said to my husband, I was like, this is the only thing that could like match running for me, like 1 to 1. Granted, it was like a 3.5 hour hike, like directly straight up an Alp. But then we got to the top, not the tippy top, but like one of the, uh, multiple tops of one of the pitches. And goodness gracious, like, I was like, between movement and nature, I would be just like satisfied. I
Yeah.
had no cell service.
The best.
It was amazing. I mean, so for me, when I run, I have that feeling, right?
Mhm.
Where I drop into kind of just like a breath, kind of repetitive, you know, space where I can see the beauty. And living in New York, you have to find the green spaces and the beauty. And so I run to the parks, I run around the parks, and then I come home. But yeah, it's like it's been a huge part of my life, and it's something that I look forward to.
That's so awesome. Well, Maya, you are one of my most interesting friends, so layered, so inspirational, and really, I mean, we said it at the beginning of the podcast, you do a really good job of listening to your patients and the people in your community that you help and meeting them where they are and making recommendations that are sustainable for them so that they can see real change in their life. So thank you for all that you do, for being a guest here on the podcast, for writing your book, which was a labor of love during a shutdown. So kudos to you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Where can people grab the book? Where can they follow along? Where can they learn more? Where can they see you loving on eggs?
Loving on eggs, right? So they can find Eating from Our Roots everywhere that books are sold. I had someone tell me, they said I went to Target. I had one person say I went to their local bookstore, and I was like, that's right, everywhere that books are sold. And I can be found across social at Maya Feller RD or on my website, mayafellernutrition.com. And if you want to see me loving up on some eggs, basically any farmer's market in New York, guaranteed I will be there.
I love it. Look out for Maya at your farmer's market. This was really fun. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you so much for having me.